He built an empire that made governments tremble, and then one woman walked onto his plane and burned it all down. Raphael Voss spent 20 years making sure no one could touch him. No law, no enemy, no consequence. He sat at the top of the most dangerous criminal organization in the country and called it a kingdom. Tonight, at 36,000 feet above the Atlantic, surrounded by champagne and the woman he planned to marry, he believed he was untouchable. He was wrong. If this story already has you gripped, hit that like button right now, drop your city in the comments below, and let's see how far this story travels. Now, let's get into it. The cabin smelled like recycled air and expensive cologne. That particular combination of sealed luxury that exists only in first class, where the seats recline into beds and the champagne arrives before the seatbelt sign has even clicked off. Raphael Voss had boarded the flight to Paris the way he did everything. Ahead of schedule, ahead of everyone else, with two men walking slightly behind him who were paid specifically to make sure no one came too close without permission. He was not a large man in the way that people expected. When civilians pictured someone like Raphael Voss, they imagined bulk, visible threat, the kind of physical presence that explains itself. Raphael was lean, medium height, with dark hair gone silver at the temples, and eyes the color of river water in winter, gray-green, shallow-looking until you stared into them long enough to realize there was no bottom. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and wore it the way someone wears a second skin. He had been doing this long enough that power had stopped being something he performed. It was simply what he was. Vivian Cross was already seated when he arrived, long legs crossed, a glass of still water at her elbow, because she didn't drink on planes. She was beautiful in the way that required significant daily effort and significant financial support, and she was smart enough to know that, and smart enough not to say it. She and Raphael had been together for 14 months, long enough for the cameras to catch them at enough events that the tabloids had started calling them a power couple. Short enough that she still sometimes watched him from across a room and felt the small, quiet unease of realizing she did not fully know him. "You're late," she said, not looking up from her phone. "By 4 minutes." "You're never late by 4 minutes." Raphael settled into the seat beside her. One of his men, Dmitri, thick-necked, 40, the kind of face that had been broken and reset enough times that it looked deliberately carved, took the seat across the aisle. The other, a younger man named Cole, who had been with Raphael for less than a year, positioned himself 2 rows back. Raphael had 3 more people elsewhere on the plane. This was not paranoia. This was the minimum operational baseline for a man who had, over the course of his career, survived 4 assassination attempts, 2 federal investigations, and 1 night in a Bucharest hotel room that he still did not discuss with anyone. "There was a delay at the gate," he said. "A passport check." Vivian finally looked at him. "They flagged you?" "They always flag me. They never find anything." He took the champagne flute from the flight attendant who materialized at his elbow and drank half of it in one pull. "We're fine." She watched him the way she had been watching him more often lately. Carefully, with that small vertical crease between her brows that appeared when she was computing something she hadn't yet solved. He noticed it and chose not to address it. There were categories of things Raphael did not address, and Vivian's growing unease fell comfortably into one of them. The plane began to push back from the gate. Paris had been his idea. 3 weeks, a rented apartment in the 7th arrondissement, dinner reservations at places where the waiting list was measured in months. He had told Vivian it was a celebration, new investment territory opening in Western Europe, the legitimate side of the business expanding in ways that would make the other side of the business easier to obscure. She knew about the legitimate side. She understood in the abstract that there were aspects of his operation that existed in gray areas. She did not know, or had chosen not to know, exactly how gray those areas were. This trip was also a strategic repositioning. 3 of his lieutenants in New York were getting nervous. There was pressure from a federal task force that had been building a case for what his lawyer privately estimated was 18 months, maybe 2 years. Raphael had spent the past 6 weeks systematically moving assets, restructuring accounts, inserting distance between himself and anything that could be traced. Paris was partially vacation. It was also him putting an ocean between himself and a city that was starting to feel like it was tightening around him. He was good at reading rooms. He had survived as long as he had because of it. He was good at reading people, reading shifts in loyalty, reading the specific quality of silence that precedes betrayal. He was not, at that particular moment, reading the economy cabin. The flight had been airborne for 40 minutes when the flight attendant, a woman in her late 30s, professional composure worn like armor, approached his seat with the careful walk of someone carrying a message they would rather not deliver. "Mr. Voss," he turned from the window, "I apologize for disturbing you. I was asked to pass along a message." She held out a small folded card, the kind pulled from an onboard notepad, the handwriting inside it neat and deliberate. "From a passenger in economy." He took the card, unfolded it, read it once, then read it again. "Your wife is on this plane. Your daughter's too. Row 24. She says you should come back or she will come forward." Raphael's face did not change. This was a skill he had developed over decades, the ability to absorb impact without showing it. He folded the card once, slid it into his jacket pocket, and said, "Thank you," to the flight attendant in the same tone he would have used ordering another drink. But Vivian had been watching. "What was that?" "Nothing. Wrong passenger." She looked at him for a beat longer than comfortable. "You went white." "I'm fine." "Raphael," I said, "I'm fine." The words came out sharper than he intended, and he saw her register it, that small recalibration that happens in a person's eyes when they file something away. He breathed in through his nose, slow and deliberate, and turned back to the window. Below them, somewhere under a floor of cloud, the Atlantic was dark and enormous and completely indifferent. His wife, Serena. He had not spoken her name out loud in 2 years, had not allowed himself to think about it longer than the few seconds required to redirect his mind to something more manageable. She existed in a mental category that he had sealed shut the same way he sealed everything that couldn't be controlled, with distance, with silence, with the substitution of operational problem for emotional reality. He waited 3 minutes. Then he undid his seatbelt. "Bathroom," he said to Vivian. He walked toward the front of the plane, stopped, reversed direction, and walked toward the back. Dmitri watched him pass without moving. Raphael shook his head slightly. "Stay," and kept walking. Economy class was a different country. Tighter, louder, the air somehow more used. He moved through it with his shoulders slightly forward, the way he moved through anywhere he didn't own, which was almost nowhere. People glanced up at him and then away. He was dressed well enough to be conspicuous back here, and he knew it. Row 24. He saw the girls first. They were asleep, both of them, tucked against each other at the window seats, sharing a thin airline blanket. They were 6 years old. He knew that because he had done the math, grimly, the same way he did the math on everything, calculated the timeline, confirmed what it meant, and then locked the calculation away. They were small, dark-haired. Their faces in sleep had that total absence of performance that belongs only to children and the deeply unconscious. He did not let himself look at them for more than a second. Then he looked at the woman in the aisle seat. Serena Vale. She was not the person he remembered. That was the first thing he understood standing there in the aisle of an economy cabin at 36,000 feet, gripping the headrest of the row ahead of her with one hand because he needed something to grip. The Serena he remembered had been 27, soft-voiced, perpetually on the edge of apology. A woman who had loved him with a depth that he had correctly identified as a liability and had treated accordingly. She had been afraid of him. Not in the immediate physical sense, but in the deeper sense, the way people are afraid of weather systems or fate, the kind of fear that doesn't stop you from walking outside but never fully leaves. This woman was not afraid. She was in her early 30s now. Her dark hair was pulled back simply. She wore no jewelry except a small watch. She had a book open in her lap, but she wasn't reading it. She had been watching him approach from the moment he stepped through the curtain. Her eyes were the same, dark brown, steady, the kind that absorbed rather than reflected. But whatever had been soft in them before was gone. "Sit down," she said quietly. "I'll stand." "Sit down, Raphael. You're making a scene." He looked around. 3 or 4 passengers were already watching. He pulled out the empty middle seat beside her and sat. Up close, she smelled like the same soap she had always used. Something simple. Something he had hated himself for recognizing. And underneath it, the particular exhaustion of someone who has been on a plane for hours with two small children. "What is this?" he said. It wasn't a question. "It's a flight to Paris." She turned a page in her book without looking at it. "Don't." She closed the book, set it in the seat pocket in front of her. When she looked at him, there was nothing uncertain in her face, no performance of calm over panic. She was simply calm. He found it more unsettling than anger would have been. "My lawyers filed 3 weeks ago," she said. "Divorce, full custody, asset disclosure." She said the words the way someone reads a grocery list. "Your legal team has been stalling. They're very good at stalling. You trained them to be. We can discuss this in Paris. We can discuss it now. The girls are right there. They're asleep." A beat. "Do you know their names?" The question landed in a specific place. He felt it the way you feel a small cut. Not immediately painful, but precise, the kind that bleeds more than it should. "Serena." "Mara and Lena," she said. "Mara is the one by the window. She talks in her sleep. Lena is the one against her shoulder. She doesn't like loud noises. She's been that way since she was 8 months old." She looked at him. "You wouldn't know that. I sent money. Every month. I know. The money arrived. You did not." Her voice had the specific flatness of someone who has rehearsed a conversation so many times in their own head that the actual delivery of it has become almost administrative. "That's not what I'm here to discuss." Raphael kept his voice very quiet. "Why are you on this specific flight?" "Because you are." "How did you know it?" "How do you think?" Her eyes didn't move from his. "You're not the only one who can read a room, Raphael. You're just the only one who ever got credit for it." He sat with that. Around them, the plane hummed with pressurized normalcy. A child 2 rows back was watching something on a tablet, the thin sound of a cartoon leaking through inadequate headphones. A man across the aisle was asleep with his mouth open. The ordinary machinery of ordinary life moving at 500 miles per hour over the ocean, while Raphael Voss sat in a middle seat in economy class and tried to calculate exactly how exposed he was. "What do you want?" he said. "What I'm entitled to." "Be specific." She reached under the seat in front of her and pulled out a flat envelope. Manila, sealed, thick. She held it out to him. He didn't take it. After a moment, she set it on his knee. "Divorce settlement. Custody agreement. Full, sole, primary. With supervised visitation if you can demonstrate behavioral standards I currently find unlikely. Asset disclosure. And one other thing." She paused. "Your cooperation." "My cooperation." "With the federal investigation." She said it quietly enough that it wouldn't carry. "I have been cooperating with them for 8 months. I have documentation you don't know I have, things you left behind when you left, things you didn't think I understood." A small, humorless movement of her mouth that wasn't quite a smile. "You always assumed I didn't understand, Raphael. That was your second biggest mistake." The plane hit a pocket of turbulence. Brief, mild, the kind that makes glasses rattle. And he watched Mara shift in her sleep, tuck her head deeper into the blanket, and settle. He did not realize he was watching her until he caught himself doing it. "What was the first?" he said. Serena didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was very even. "Thinking I would disappear when it got hard." Oh. He went back to first class. He sat down beside Vivian, poured himself a full glass of champagne, and drank it. Vivian watched this without comment. He had taught her, over the course of 14 months, that there were moods in which comment was counterproductive. She had learned this lesson efficiently. "Who was it?" she asked when the glass was empty. "Business." "In economy?" "Yes." Another beat of silence. Outside the window, clouds had moved in below them, a flat floor of white that made the world look cleaned and simplified. "Was it a woman?" Vivian asked. Raphael looked at her. In the angled light of the cabin, with the champagne glass empty in his hand and the envelope from Serena sitting in his inside jacket pocket against his chest like a loaded weapon, he looked at the woman who had been sitting beside him for 14 months and tried to remember the last time he had looked at her clearly. Not as a component, not as an element of the image he maintained, actually looked at her. She was watching him with those eyes that were too perceptive for what he had needed her to be. And he understood, with a clarity that felt like standing in cold water, that she had already drawn most of the correct conclusions and was now simply waiting to hear which ones he would confirm. "Don't," he said. "Don't what? Ask questions? Don't make this a scene." "I'm not making anything," Vivian said quietly. "I'm sitting here, in the seat I've been in for the past hour, watching you come back from wherever you went looking like something took you apart and put you back together wrong." She set her water glass down with a small, precise click. "Is she on this plane?" Raphael said nothing. "Is that your wife?" Still nothing. "Raphael." Her voice had dropped below anything a nearby passenger could detect. "I'm going to ask you one more time. Is your wife, the one you told me you divorced 4 years ago, is she on this plane right now?" He looked straight ahead. "The divorce was finalized on paper." Vivian went very still. "It was complicated," he said. "There were conditions. Assets that needed to be managed before—" "Stop." She said it quietly, with a specific quality of quiet that he recognized, the kind that comes just before something breaks. "Don't explain it to me like it's a financial instrument. Just tell me the truth, one time. Is she on this plane?" "Yes." The word sat between them. Vivian pressed her lips together. A muscle in her jaw moved. She turned to the window, and for a long moment there was just the sound of the engine and the recycled air and two people sitting in adjacent seats, with the entire architecture of their relationship rearranging itself without either of them making a sound. "And the children?" she said, to the window. He said nothing. She turned back. Her eyes were dry. Vivian Cross was many things, and sentimental in visible ways was not among them. "How many?" "2 girls." "How old?" 6. She did the arithmetic the same way any intelligent person would. Subtracted 6 from 14 months, calculated what the difference meant, understood what it meant about the story he had told her. He watched her do it. He didn't look away. He had survived long enough to know that looking away in these moments was worse. "You told me," she said carefully, "that you had been separated for 6 years, that there were no children. I know what I told you. Were you ever going to say—" "No," he said. And then, because he owed her at least the specific honesty of that, "Probably not. It wasn't relevant to—" "To what? To me? To my life?" Her voice was still controlled. It was the kind of control that cost something. "You mean it wasn't relevant to the version of yourself you were showing me?" He didn't answer, because the answer was yes, and they both knew it. Dimitri across the aisle was watching without appearing to watch, the practiced peripheral attention of a man paid to notice everything. Raphael angled his body slightly, not enough to be obvious, enough to create a fraction of privacy. "I need to manage this," he said, "the legal situation. There's documentation she's carrying that I need to assess before we land." Vivian stared at him. "I need you to let me work this through. Let you." She said the 2 words with a particular inflection. "Let you." "Vivian." "I'm not your staff, Raphael." Still quiet, still controlled. But something underneath the control was shifting, some tectonic movement that he could feel even if he couldn't see it. "You don't need to manage me. You need to tell me what is actually happening on this plane." He reached into his jacket and removed the envelope, set it on the shared armrest between them. He didn't open it. "Her name is Serena Vale. She's my wife. Legally, yes. We separated when she was pregnant. I did not handle it well. I was in the middle of—" He paused, selected the word carefully. "A consolidation period. There were threats I needed to manage. I made choices that prioritized the organization over your pregnant wife." "Yes." "And your daughters." "They weren't born yet." Vivian looked at him for a long time. "That's what you're going with? They weren't born yet?" He said nothing. "Where are they sitting? Economy, row 24? "She flew economy, with 2 6-year-olds, on the same flight as you." Vivian's voice had taken on the particular tone of someone assembling a picture piece by piece and not enjoying what they were seeing. "She knew you'd be on this flight." "Yes." Which means she planned this. Yes. Which means she's not here by accident, and this isn't just a divorce filing. She looked at the envelope. What's in there? I don't know. I haven't opened it. Open it. He looked at her. If you want me to still be sitting here when this plane lands, Vivian said, open that envelope. He opened it. The papers were thorough. He gave her that. However long Serena had been preparing this, and based on the volume and specificity of what he held in his hands, it had been more than a year, probably 2. She had done it with the kind of methodical patience he typically associated with his own best people. Divorce petition. Custody filing, sole primary with a list of behavioral requirements for any future contact that were worded with the precision of someone who had legal counsel and had also spent years thinking about exactly what she would demand. Financial disclosure requests covering 7 named accounts, 4 of which he had thought were effectively invisible to any party outside his own financial team. He turned to the last section, stopped, looked at the document, read it again. His hands were very still. What is it? Vivian asked. He couldn't answer immediately. His jaw had tightened in the specific way it did when he was processing information that required him to completely restructure his understanding of a situation. He breathed in, breathed out. She has documentation, he said, of payments, of accounts, of... He turned a page. Operational records. What kind of operational records? He looked up from the papers. Around them, the plane continued its oblivious forward motion. Meals being served 3 rows up, the drink cart beginning its rattle down the aisle, somewhere behind them a baby finally crying after holding it together since takeoff. The kind, he said quietly, that the federal investigation has been looking for. Vivian went completely still. She has been working with them, he said, for 8 months. Maybe longer. He set the papers down on his lap. His hands were still not shaking. He was somewhat impressed by this, in the distant way you notice something about yourself in crisis. She came here to deliver these to me personally, before the plane lands, before I walk off in Paris and disappear into whatever we had planned. He looked at the papers. She's giving me the chance to see what she has before it becomes public. Why would she do that? He thought about Serena's face in row 24, the book in her lap. The way she had said that was your second biggest mistake without any visible satisfaction. Because she's not doing this to destroy me, he said. And even as he said it, he understood it was true, and the understanding was somehow worse than destruction would have been. She's doing this because it's necessary. She's been waiting until she was sure the girls were protected first, until she had enough that she didn't need to rely on my cooperation. He turned one more page. She's not asking me to beg. She's telling me what's already done. Vivian looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the document in his lap. Then she looked out the window at the cloud bank below them, moving south, moving east, carrying them toward a city that was going to be nothing like what either of them had imagined when they boarded. The girls, she said. What? You have 2 daughters back there, asleep. She turned from the window. And you haven't asked about them once since you came back, not once. You've asked about the documentation. You've asked about the investigation. You've asked what she wants. She paused. You haven't asked if they're okay. He opened his mouth, closed it. What are their names? Vivian asked. He said nothing. She understood from his silence. She looked away. He needed to think. He did his best thinking in motion, always had, some circuit in him that couldn't process at rest. So he stood and walked toward the back of the plane, past Dmitri without acknowledging him, into the narrow galley area near the rear lavatories where a flight attendant was loading cups onto a tray and who looked up at him with the professional alarm of someone who has learned to be cautious about passengers who appear in the galley unannounced. I'm fine, he said. Just need a moment. She nodded and moved to the other end of the galley with her tray. He stood with his back against the wall, the envelope in his hand, the floor vibrating faintly under his feet from whatever was happening in the mechanical belly of the aircraft. Around him, the plane moved through the dark above the Atlantic, and he did the thing he never let himself do. He tried to think about it honestly. Not strategically. Honestly. He had been 29 when he met Serena. She had been working for a gallery that handled some of his legitimate art investments, Smart, quiet, completely out of her depth in his world, and completely unaware of it. He had liked that about her. He had liked a lot of things about her that, in retrospect, he had weaponized. Her gentleness, her willingness to believe the version of him he presented, her capacity to love something without needing to own it. He had told himself, at the time, that he was protecting her by not telling her everything. He had believed it, on some level, the way people believe the stories they tell themselves because the alternative story is not livable. She had found out anyway, pieces at a time, over 3 years. Never confronting him directly, because confronting him directly in those years had been genuinely dangerous. Not from him, he had never raised a hand to her, and would have had anyone on his payroll who did something similar removed from the organization permanently, but from the people around him, the environment he operated in, the gravitational field of violence that surrounded him like an atmosphere. When she had come to him and told him she was pregnant, he had experienced something he could now only describe as a mechanical failure. The emotion had been there. He was not certain he could name it clearly, some combination of fear and something he was unwilling to examine, but the response that had come out of him had been operational. He had calculated risk. He had assessed vulnerability. He had looked at the woman carrying his children and seen, with the cold efficiency that had kept him alive for 20 years, a new pressure point. And then he had done what he did with pressure points. He had removed himself from the equation. He had told himself, standing in the galley of this plane at 36,000 feet, that what he had done was protect them. He had stayed away to keep the target off them. He had sent money because money was concrete and reliable, and didn't flinch and didn't ask things of you that you didn't know how to provide. He had told himself this and known, in the part of himself that still functioned before the calculation started, that it was a comfortable lie. He had left because he did not know how to stay. The turbulence came back, stronger this time, the plane shuddering in a way that sent someone's overhead bin rattling and drew a gas from somewhere behind him. He held the wall. The vibration ran up through his feet and into his chest, and he stood in it, holding on, while the plane worked its way through the rough air, and the Atlantic continued below. When it smoothed out, he pushed off the wall and walked back through the curtain. He passed the first-class cabin without stopping. He walked to row 24. It's Mistress. Serena was awake. She had been awake. He had the impression she had been awake the entire time, the book closed now. Her hands folded in her lap, watching him come back the same way she had watched him come the first time, without surprise, without performance. Mara and Lena were still asleep. He took the middle seat again. For a long time he didn't say anything. Neither did she. The silence between them was not comfortable, but it was not hostile. It was the silence of two people who have a specific and complicated history and have arrived through different routes at the same moment. "Mara," he said finally. "She talks in her sleep." Serena looked at him. "And Lena doesn't like loud noises since she was 8 months old." He looked at his hands. "I heard you." She was quiet for a moment. "Why did you come back here?" "I don't know." "That's not an answer you give." "No." He looked up. "I'm giving it anyway." She studied him with those steady eyes. He had the sense she was looking for something specific and was not yet deciding whether she had found it. "The documents," he said. "You've given them to the federal team?" "Not these copies, but yes. Everything relevant is already filed." She said it without apology. "I didn't bring these to negotiate, Raphael. I brought them so you could see exactly what exists, so you couldn't later claim you didn't know." "Why does that matter?" "Because I'm not a weapon," she said. "I'm not doing this to punish you. I'm doing this because it needed to be done, and because the girls deserve a world where your organization doesn't reach into their lives every time someone wants leverage over you." Her voice was even and clear. "They've already had one attempt. Did you know that?" He went still. 6 months ago. Man outside the school. Lena was with me. He had a camera, long lens, and when I approached him, he left. But I knew what it was. I knew what it meant. She looked at him without blinking. "Someone in your organization, or someone adjacent to your organization, photographed my children outside their school to have something to use against you." He could not speak for a moment. So, yes, Serena said. I cooperated with the investigation. I documented everything I had. I did it because I needed the organization destroyed before it found a use for my daughters. She paused. That's the answer to the question you haven't asked, by the way. The question of why I didn't just stay quiet and take the money and raise them in peace. That's why. He looked at Mara's sleeping face against the window, the way her eyelashes lay against her cheek. She had his coloring au sol, the dark hair, the quality of stillness and sleep that looked like concentration. His throat felt constricted in a way he had not experienced since he was young, before he had trained himself out of it. There's something else in the package, Serena said. He looked at her. The last page. She watched him carefully. The medical records. You didn't read that far. He reached back into the envelope, turned to the final pages. Medical documentation, so pregnancy, prenatal, delivery records. He scanned them, confused about what he was looking for, until he reached the attached genetic summary and the notation at the bottom in Serena's handwriting. Read section 3.4. He found section 3.4. He read it. The sound of the plane fell away. Everything fell away. The recycled air, the drink cart, the distant sound of a movie playing on someone's overhead screen. He sat in the middle seat of row 24 of a transatlantic flight and read a 3-paragraph medical notation that took apart everything he thought he understood about the past 6 years. There were complications, Serena said quietly, while he was still reading. Early in the pregnancy. They told me there was a risk, that the fertilization had resulted in... She stopped. Started again. Biologically, Mara is yours. Lena is not. There was a third embryo. A donor situation from the clinic. A mix-up during a procedure. The medical team caught it during a prenatal test, and I was advised, and I had to decide what to do. She looked at Lena sleeping. She was already growing. She was already mine. I wasn't going to... Her voice faltered for the first time, something cracking very briefly at the surface before she controlled it. She is my daughter. She is her sister. That is not a biological technicality. Raphael set the papers down very slowly on his knee. You didn't tell me. His voice came out strange. You had left. You had already made it very clear that the children were an inconvenience you were managing financially. I was alone, 6 months pregnant, with a complication that terrified me, and the one person who should have been there had sent a lawyer with a check. She looked at him steadily. What was I supposed to tell you? The truth. The truth, she repeated. Like the truth you told me about what you actually were? Like the truth about the organization you were running while I thought you were a risk consultant? That truth? He had no answer for that. I told you now, she said, before the plane lands. Before any of this becomes a public record. I told you because Lana deserves to know someday, and the story of how she was told should not begin with her finding it in a legal document. She held his gaze. I'm not a villain in this story, Raphael. I never was. I was just a person who loved the wrong man and then spent 6 years protecting our daughters from the consequences. He looked at Lena. She had shifted in her sleep, one small hand curled under her chin. She had Serena's jaw, Serena's way of holding even unconscious stillness, something specific and already completely her own. Not his blood. His daughter, anyway, by every measure that turned out to matter, and he was only now at 36,000 feet, in the middle seat of row 24, understanding what that meant. What it meant that he had not been there, that he had made the calculation and removed himself, and that what he had removed himself from was not a liability. It was a life. 2 of them. I want to speak to them, he said. Serena's expression shifted. Not softened exactly, but something in it changed. When they wake up. I'm not going to... I know, she said. And the fact that she said it quickly, without hesitation, the fact that she had clearly already decided she was not afraid of this moment, told him more about how much she had changed than anything else she had said or done in the past hour. He sat there. The plane flew east. Somewhere over the mid-Atlantic, the seatbelt sign clicked on as they entered a band of turbulence, and the captain's voice came over the intercom asking passengers to return to their seats. And around them, the ordinary machinery of an ordinary flight continued its forward motion. Raphael Voss sat in the middle seat between a sleeping child and the woman who had spent 6 years quietly and methodically building the case that would end his empire. He sat there and did not move, and for the first time in 20 years, he had no idea what came next. His empire was built on the certainty that he always had a move, that there was always an exit, always an angle, always a way to reposition before the walls closed in. He had survived on this certainty the way other men survive on breathing. But Serena Vale had not built a cage. She had built something worse. She had built the truth. And when the pilot announced the initial descent into Paris-Charles de Gaulle, when the lights of the city began to materialize below the cloud bank like scattered fire, Raphael Voss looked down at them and understood with total and irreversible clarity that the man who had boarded this flight was not going to be the man who walked off it. What he did not know yet, what none of them knew, was that Vivian Cross had been sitting in first class for the past 40 minutes with her phone in her hand, and she had not been reading messages. She had been sending them. The seatbelt sign stayed on for 11 minutes. Raphael counted them. Not by looking at a clock. His watch was in his jacket pocket and he didn't reach for it, but by the internal metronome that had always run in him, that precise and involuntary counting mechanism that kicked on whenever he needed to measure something he couldn't control. 11 minutes of turbulence, the plane shuddering in irregular pulses, the overhead bins rattling, the drink cart secured somewhere behind him with the metallic clank of something being locked down before it could roll free and hurt someone. Serena did not grip the armrest. She held the book in her lap with both hands loose, not reading it, watching the seat back in front of her with the specific attention of someone who is using a neutral surface to think clearly. Her breathing was even. Raphael was aware of it in the way you become aware of small, steady things when everything larger is in motion. Len awoke when the turbulence peaked. She didn't cry. She made a small sound, a compressed kind of protest, and Serena's hand moved to her arm before the child was fully conscious, the automatic reach of someone who has done this 10,000 times in the dark. "It's okay," Serena said quietly. "Just bumps. We're fine." Lena blinked, looked at her mother, looked at the seat in front of her. Then, with the peripheral instinct of a child who has learned to read rooms without being taught, she looked at the man sitting beside her mother in the middle seat. She was small, dark-eyed, with Serena's jaw and something in the set of her brow that was entirely her own. She looked at Raphael for 3 full seconds with the direct, unfiltered assessment the children apply before they learn to be polite about it. Then she looked back at her mother. "Who's that?" she said. Serena kept her voice very level. "Someone Mommy knows. From work? From a long time ago." Lena considered this with the solemnity of a 6-year-old processing information that doesn't quite fit existing categories. Then she pulled the airline blanket up to her chin and put her head back against her sister's shoulder and closed her eyes again. Raphael exhaled. It came out of him without permission, that breath, and Serena heard it. She turned just enough to look at him. He could not read what was on her face. Not precisely, but there was something in it that was not unkind, which was somehow worse than if it had been. "You should go back," she said. "I know." "Your fiancé?" "I know." He looked at Lena's closed eyes. Her lashes were very dark against her cheek, the same quality of stillness as her sister's, that complete unconscious surrender to rest that children do and adults slowly lose. "Did she ask about me?" "When she got older, did she?" He stopped, reformulated. "Do they know I exist?" Serena was quiet for a moment. "They know they have a father," she said. "I didn't lie about that. I told them he was someone who had to be somewhere else." She looked at her hands. "I didn't tell them you chose it. I didn't tell them the specifics. They're 6. But they'll ask. Yes. What will you tell them?" She turned to look at him directly, and her expression had the particular quality of someone who has already lived through the conversation he's asking about, has already lain awake at 3 a.m. drafting versions of it, has already felt the specific weight of what it means to explain an absence to children who have only ever known the shape of it. "The truth," she said, "when they're old enough for it." A pause. "The real truth. Not the version where their father was just busy or complicated or made mistakes that anyone could make. The actual truth. She held his gaze. I think they deserve that. I think most people deserve it, eventually. He looked away first. The turbulence had eased. The seatbelt sign clicked off with a soft chime, and the flight attendants began moving again, and the plane resumed its particular illusion of normalcy. Everyone sealed in their small zones, everyone performing the collective pretense that being suspended in an aluminum tube above the ocean was a routine and unremarkable thing. I need to go back, he said. Yes. He stood, hesitated, looked down at Serena in the aisle seat with both daughters sleeping against each other to her left. The overhead light catching the exhaustion in her face that she had been working not to show. And he understood, with a clarity that came from somewhere beneath calculation, that she was tired. Not just from the flight, from years of it, from the sustained effort of protecting two children by herself in the shadow of something that should never have touched them. He didn't say anything. There was nothing he could say that wouldn't be insufficient. He walked back to first class. Vivian was not in her seat. He stopped in the aisle, looked at the empty seat, the folded blanket, her water glass still on the tray table beside a folded napkin. He looked at Dmitri across the aisle. Dmitri made the smallest movement of his head toward the front of the cabin. Raphael found her standing near the forward galley, her back to the cabin, her phone held against her sternum rather than to her ear. She heard him come up behind her and turned. Her face was composed in the specific way that takes effort. The jaw set slightly, the eyes direct, the careful architecture of a woman who has decided not to let him see what the past hour has cost her. You were gone a long time, she said. I know. I'm sorry. Something flickered across her face at the apology. Surprise, maybe, or the thing that lives just under surprise. Raphael did not apologize. She knew this. He knew she knew it. The words sat between them with an unfamiliar weight. Were you talking to her? Vivian asked. Yes. And? He moved past the question in the way he moved past most things he wasn't ready to engage directly. There are details that need to be managed before we land. The legal documentation she's carrying is more comprehensive than I... Raphael? She said his name in a way that stopped him. Not loud, barely above a murmur, but something in it was final. I need you to talk to me like I'm a person, not like I'm a situation you're managing. He looked at her. The forward galley was narrow, barely enough room for two people standing. He could hear the flight crew moving in the back section of first class, the soft clink of preparation for final meal service. Outside the small circular window to his left, the sky had turned the specific shade of deep charcoal that happens over open ocean at altitude before dawn reaches up from the horizon. She's not just filing for divorce, he said. I gathered that. She's been cooperating with the federal investigation. She has documentation, operational records, financial traces, account structures that she shouldn't have been able to access. Things that were, he paused, protected. Protected by your people. Yes. Vivian's chin came up slightly. And she got through anyway. She was in the house for 3 years. She wasn't supposed to. She wasn't part of any of it. She didn't have clearance. She was kept completely separated from... He stopped, heard himself, understood how it sounded. She was intelligent and patient, and I underestimated both of those things. Apparently a common occurrence, Vivian said. It landed. He let it. What was in the envelope? She asked. He told her. Not all of it. Not Lena, not the medical records, not the specific Section 3.4 that he still had not fully processed. He told her about the divorce filing, the federal cooperation, the scope of documentation Serena had accumulated. He told her in careful operational language, the way he reported to himself when he was assessing damage. Vivian listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, looking at the galley wall behind him. The girls, she said finally. Are they his? She corrected herself immediately. Yours. Are they yours? He heard the slip, chose not to address it. One of them is. Vivian's eyes moved to his face. One. There were medical complications during the pregnancy. A mix-up at a clinic. One of the twins is mine biologically. The other, he let it stop there. And you knew? No, I just found out. In the envelope. She absorbed this slowly, visibly, the way someone absorbs something they weren't braced for even though they already understood, on some level, that nothing about this situation was going to be clean. How are you feeling? She asked. He blinked. I'm asking, Vivian said, because you look the way people look when they're about to make a decision that other people will be paying for. And I've been sitting next to you for 14 months, and I know the difference between you processing information and you building a counter strategy. Right now I need to know which one this is. He looked at her. Really looked, the same way he had tried to look at her an hour ago, before he had the envelope, when she'd asked him if he'd gone pale. She was 31 years old, and she was brilliant in the specific way that never showed on the surface until it needed to. And she was standing in a galley 30,000 feet above the ocean in a situation she had had no part in creating, and she was asking him how he felt. I don't know, he said, for the second time in an hour. The words came out with the same unguarded quality as when he'd said them to Serena, and he noticed that Vivian's expression shifted at them the same way. Not softened, but changed. That's still not an answer you give, she said quietly. I know. She looked at her phone, turned it over once in her hand. Something in the gesture was deliberate enough that he noticed it. What did you do? He said. She looked up. Vivian, when I was in the back, what did you do on your phone? She didn't answer immediately. In the silence, the flight crew moved past them into the galley, murmuring apologies, working around them with the practiced ease of people trained to navigate awkward proximity without acknowledging it. I made a call, she said. To who? My brother. He processed this. Her brother was an attorney in London. Vivian had described him as corporate, transactional, uninteresting. He had never paid significant attention to the relationship. Why? Because, she turned her phone over again. My brother works with a legal team that has been approached twice in the past year by investigators building a case related to your organization. She held his gaze. I didn't know that until 4 months ago. He told me because he was concerned, because he'd seen my name in things. The temperature of the conversation changed. He told you 4 months ago, Raphael said. Yes. And you said nothing. I was trying to figure out what it meant, whether it was real, whether... She stopped. Whether you were what I was starting to think you were. He kept his voice very steady. And what did you tell him tonight? When you called? She looked at him for a long moment. Her face was doing the thing it did when she was deciding how honest to be. Not dishonest by nature, but strategic, a quality he had always recognized in her because he had always possessed it himself. I told him I was on a plane with your wife and that I thought he needed to know. The words dropped into him like stones into still water. You told him. His voice was flat. Yes. That she's on this flight. Yes. Vivian. He breathed carefully through his nose. Do you understand what that... I understand exactly what it means. Her voice was quiet but entirely without apology. It means that when this plane lands in Paris, there will be people who know where everyone involved is, including me. She met his eyes. I'm not going to disappear into this situation, Raphael. I'm not going to be the fourth person on this plane who is positioned wherever you need her to be. He looked at her. I'm not her, Vivian said. I'm not going to spend 6 years collecting evidence and building a case. I'm not that kind of patient. Something in her jaw tightened. But I'm also not going to stand in a galley at 36,000 feet and let you manage me back into my seat. He should have felt threat. He should have been running the calculation, who her brother would call, what it meant for the Paris operation, how quickly he could reposition. He was aware of these calculations waiting on the other side of some door in his mind, ready to run. He didn't open the door. I know, he said. She blinked. You're not her, he said. You're not anyone I've managed well. I know that. A long pause. Then what am I? She asked, and her voice was quieter now. The strategic layer dropped for just a moment, something real underneath it that he recognized as the same question she had been building toward for months without asking it directly. He had no answer that was honest and also kind. He had learned, over a long career, that those two categories rarely overlapped. "I don't know," he said. She absorbed that, put her phone in her jacket pocket, looked past him toward the cabin. "Go sit down," she said, not unkindly. "I need a few minutes." Dmitri was waiting for him. Not visibly. Dmitri never did anything visibly. But the angle of his body in the seat had shifted in the particular way that meant he had information and needed to deliver it. Raphael settled into his seat, picked up his water glass, set it down without drinking from it. "Talk," he said quietly, without looking at Dmitri. Cole flagged something. Dmitri's voice was at the lower edge of audible, the particular frequency of a man trained to speak without moving his lips significantly. "Passenger in row 16. He's been on his phone since the seatbelt sign went off. Taking photos." "Of what?" "The cabin. Us." A pause. "You specifically, when you walked back." Raphael was quiet. Cole ran the face against the database. "The man's a freelancer. Strings for 3 outlets, 2 tabloids, 1 wire service." Dmitri's jaw moved fractionally. "He knew you were on this flight before he boarded." Raphael considered this. Then he considered Serena sitting in row 24, and the envelope in his jacket, and Vivian in the galley with her phone, and the particular geometry of the situation he was in. How many angles there were, how many of them were now beyond his reach. "What do you want to do?" Dmitri said. "Nothing." Dmitri looked at him. "Nothing," Raphael repeated. "Don't approach him. Don't touch the phone. Don't make it worse." He looked at the seat back in front of him. "If we move on him at altitude, it becomes a story. Right now it's a photo in economy class. Leave it." Dmitri did not look satisfied, but he settled back. Raphael reached into his jacket and found the envelope again. Pulled out the last page. The medical documentation. He read section 3. 4 again. More slowly this time. In the way you reread something, not because you didn't understand it, but because you're trying to understand what it means to have understood it. Lena. Not his blood. Sitting 6 rows behind him against her sister's shoulder with the airline blanket pulled to her chin, already gone back to sleep. Already completely indifferent to him in the way that only children and the genuinely free can be indifferent, without cruelty, without performance, simply because the fact of him had not yet become a fact to her. He thought about what Serena had said. She was already growing. She was already mine. He thought about the 3 seconds Lena had looked at him when she woke during the turbulence. The direct, uncalculating assessment, the total absence of fear. He thought about the man in row 16 with the camera. He thought about Vivian in the galley with her phone pressed to her sternum. He thought about his lawyer in New York, who would, in approximately 3 hours when the office opened, arrive to find a series of communications that would make the next 72 hours extremely complicated. He thought about Paris, which had been designed as a repositioning, a retreat to cleaner ground, an ocean of distance between himself and the investigation, and understood, sitting in first class with the city beginning to materialize somewhere below the clouds ahead, that there was no cleaner ground. He had been running from consequence for 20 years. He had been very good at it. He had built an organization specifically engineered to put distance between action and accountability, to create so many layers of separation that the man at the top was always theoretically unreachable. Serena had not tried to reach him through any of those layers. She had simply waited for him to come to her. He was not a man who admitted to admiring people who were working to destroy him, but he sat in first class on a plane descending toward Paris and felt, beneath the fear and the operational damage assessment and the cold recognition of how exposed he was, something that was uncomfortably close to respect. The intercom chimed. The captain's voice, accented and calm. 20 minutes to final descent. Please return to seats. Please ensure all electronic devices were in the correct mode. Please prepare for arrival. Raphael folded the medical document. Put it back in the envelope. Put the envelope in his jacket pocket against his chest. 20 minutes. He stood. Walked to the galley where Vivian had been standing. She was gone. He walked back through the first-class curtain and found her in row 24. She was standing in the aisle. Serena was looking up at her. Mar had woken and was watching Vivian with the cautious, assessing attention of a child who has encountered an unexpected variable. Lena still slept. He stopped. Vivian and Serena were not speaking. They were simply looking at each other with the particular quality of attention that exists between two people who are trying to determine in real time what the other one is. Then Vivian said quietly, "I didn't know about you, or them." Serena looked at her for a moment. "I know. I'm going to be honest with you," Vivian said. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do with any of this." Serena looked at Raphael standing at the edge of the curtain, then back at Vivian. "Neither do I," she said, "but I know what I'm doing with the next 20 minutes. And I'd suggest you figure out the same." Vivian turned, saw Raphael. The three of them stood in the narrow aisle of the economy cabin, the plane already beginning its first gentle tilt toward descent, Paris somewhere below them in the dark, and none of them, not the man who had spent 20 years controlling every room he entered, not the woman who had spent 6 years building the architecture of his fall, not the woman who had spent 14 months in his orbit without knowing what she was orbiting, had any clear idea what happened when the wheels touched down. Then Mara's voice came from the window seat, small and unhurried and entirely unburdened by context. "Mama, I can see lights." Serena turned to look. The city was there below the clouds, spreading in every direction, a field of scattered fire, indifferent and beautiful, waiting for all of them. And from 2 rows ahead, where the man from row 16 had quietly repositioned during the descent, a camera shutter clicked once in the specific silence between engine sounds, capturing Raphael Voss standing in the economy aisle of a transatlantic flight with 2 women and 2 children, his empire already burning in the documentation pressed against his chest, his face finally, irreversibly, exactly what it had always been underneath the construction. The wheels touched down at 6:47 in the morning. Raphael felt the impact through the soles of his shoes, through the floor of the aircraft, that particular shudder of a machine returning to Earth after hours of pretending physics didn't apply to it. Around him, the economy cabin exhaled, the collective decompression of people who had been sealed together for 7 hours and were now permitted to remember that they were individuals with separate destinations. Overhead, bins were opening before the plane had fully slowed. A child somewhere near the back was crying with the specific relief of someone whose body had given up pretending to be fine. Raphael stood in the aisle where Vivian had left him. She had returned to first class 30 seconds after the camera clicked. She had walked past him without a word, without eye contact, with the particular quality of movement that belongs to people who have made a decision and are no longer interested in discussing it. He had let her go. There had been nothing else to do. Serena had watched him watch Vivian leave. Then she had turned back to the window where Mara was pointing at the lights spreading beneath the clouds, narrating Paris to her sister in the solemn, authoritative tone of someone delivering important geographical news. Lena had pressed her nose to the glass and fogged it with her breath and drawn a small circle in the fog with one finger. Raphael had stood there for another moment, then gone back to his seat and sat in it for the remaining 12 minutes of descent, with his hands folded on his knees and nothing operational left to do. Now, on the ground, he waited. Dmitri was already standing, efficient, pulling the single carry-on from the overhead bin. Cole had appeared from 2 rows back, that quiet materialization Raphael's people were trained to perform. Raphael looked past them toward the forward door and thought about the sequence of the next hour. Deplaning, passport control, the car that was supposed to be waiting, the apartment in the 7th, the phone calls he needed to make before New York woke up. He thought about all of this and understood that it had become theoretical. The architecture was still there, but the ground under it had shifted, and none of it was going to proceed the way it had been designed. He pulled out his phone as the seatbelt sign went dark and found 17 messages from his attorney. He opened the first one. "Call me before you clear customs. Do not clear customs without calling me first." The second, "I mean that. Before customs. This is not optional." The third, sent 40 minutes later than the second. "Raphael, they have filed for emergency asset freeze, US and EU both. This is coordinated. Call me." He read the 3 messages and put the phone face down on his knee and sat for exactly 4 seconds. Then he picked it up and called. His attorney, Marcus Fell, 62, silver-haired, A man who had navigated 20 years of Raphael's legal architecture with the composure of someone who had priced the risk correctly from the beginning, answered on the first ring. "Where are you?" "Paris. Just landed." "Are you through customs?" "Not yet. We're still on the plane." He heard Marcus exhale. "Good. Listen to me carefully. The U.S. attorney filed for emergency injunctive relief at 2 a.m. Eastern. Asset freeze, 7 primary accounts, 3 holding structures in Delaware and Luxembourg. They got it. Judge signed off at 3:15. A pause. Simultaneously, Europulse, working with French financial intelligence, has filed parallel proceedings under the Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty. The Paris accounts are also frozen pending investigation. Raphael said nothing. "That's not the part I need you to hear first," Marcus said. "Then tell me the part I need to hear first. The information that triggered the emergency filing, the specificity of it, the account structures, the operational terminology. This is not something they built from surveillance or standard financial investigation. Someone gave them a roadmap." Marcus's voice was careful in the way of a man delivering a verdict he has checked twice. The filing references materials that could only have come from inside the organization, specific account designations that only 3 people had access to, transaction codes that were changed 4 months ago and that the new codes appear in the filing. Raphael went very still. "The new codes," he said, "changed 4 months ago." "Yes." "Marcus." His voice had dropped to something very quiet. "The new codes were distributed to how many people?" "By my count, the restructure last November, you moved to a need-to-know model. 4 people had the updated structures. You, myself, the financial director, and Cole," Raphael said. In the aisle 2 rows ahead of him, Cole was helping an elderly passenger retrieve a bag from the overhead bin, patient and efficient, his face entirely relaxed. "The filing specifically references the Luxembourg structure by its internal name," Marcus was saying, "the name that was assigned in November, the name that appears in communications between you and—" "Stop." Raphael kept his voice level. "Don't say anything else on this line." "Raphael? I'll call you from a secure line in 90 minutes. Don't move anything. Don't communicate with anyone in the organization until you hear from me." He paused. "And Marcus, the asset freeze, is it comprehensive?" A beat. "For practical purposes, yes." He ended the call. Cole was now standing in the aisle, carry-on bag over one shoulder, phone in hand, waiting with the patient readiness of a man who has done his job and is ready for the next instruction. Raphael looked at him. Cole had been with him for 11 months. He had come through a referral from a lieutenant in the Chicago operation. Clean record, professional background in private security, good instincts, adaptable. Raphael had assessed him as reliable. He had elevated him faster than usual because the man had demonstrated, in 3 separate situations over the past year, the kind of calm under pressure that Raphael valued above almost every other quality. He was looking at Cole now with different information and trying to understand how he had missed it. He thought about 4 months ago, the restructure, the new account designations. He thought about who had been in the room when those designations were discussed. He thought about Cole's phone during the flight and Dimitri's quiet report. He's been on his phone since the seatbelt sign went off and understood that he had received that information and assessed it as a tabloid photographer problem and had not run the second calculation. He stood, picked up his jacket, walked toward the front of the plane. Cole fell into step behind him, the automatic positioning of a man trained to walk 2 paces back and 1 to the left. Dimitri came up on the right. They moved through the cabin in the configuration they had held for months. The established geometry of Raphael's security, the physical syntax of his protection. He stopped at the first-class curtain. Vivian was not in her seat. Her blanket was folded on the headrest, her water glass empty, her coat gone from the overhead bin. She had deplaned already, through the forward door ahead of everyone, which meant she had positioned herself before touchdown, which meant she had known she was leaving before the wheels hit the ground. He stood at the edge of first class and looked at her empty seat for 2 seconds. Then he pushed through the forward door. The jetway was a gray tube of recycled airport air and the specific anxiety of transitions. Flight crew nodded at him as he passed. He kept moving. Behind him, Dmitri and Cole maintained their positions. He stopped walking at the end of the jetway, at the point where it opened into the terminal proper, and turned around. Cole stopped. Their eyes met. Raphael held the eye contact for exactly long enough. Then he said quietly, "Dmitri, take his phone." Cole's face moved, a small, rapid sequence of expressions. Confusion, assessment, something that was not quite fear but was adjacent to it. "Mr. Voss." "Now." Raphael's voice had not changed in volume or tone. It never did. Dmitri moved. Cole took a half step back, which told Raphael everything he needed to know about whether his assessment was correct, because a man with a clean conscience does not step back from the man reaching for his phone. Dmitri had the phone in 2 seconds. Cole's jaw was working. "I don't know what you think." "The Luxembourg account," Raphael said. "Internal designation, the one assigned in November." He watched Cole's face. "Say it." Cole said nothing. "You know it," Raphael said. "I'm asking you to say it." "Nothing." "Then I know what I know." Raphael looked at Dmitri. "Get the car, rear terminal exit, not the main hall. Call Stefan to meet us." He looked back at Cole. "You're going to walk with us to the car. You're going to do it calmly. And then you and I are going to have a conversation in private that I would prefer not to have in an international airport." Cole looked at him. The confusion was gone from his face. What remained was something flatter and more considered. Not fear exactly, but the face of a man who has been running a calculation and has reached the point where the numbers have stopped working in his favor. "You don't have anything," Cole said. "I have the filing, I have the terminology, I have the timeline." Raphael held his gaze. "And I have 11 months of watching how you operate, which tells me you're smart enough to have covered most of it, which means whatever you didn't cover is what the filing is built on." He paused. "Which means someone gave you a specific piece to give them, someone who knew exactly what the investigators needed to trigger emergency jurisdiction." Cole's expression shifted again, something in it that Raphael read after a moment as something he had not expected. It wasn't calculation. It was relief. "You still think this is about me?" Cole said. Raphael looked at him. "You think I flipped?" Cole's voice was steady, almost conversational. "You think I'm the source?" The account designation was in the filing because Serena Vale filed an affidavit 6 months ago that included a document she photographed from your home office in Connecticut. Cole met his gaze without flinching. "I've seen the affidavit. I was shown it 3 weeks ago by the investigators when they approached me to cooperate." He paused. "I said no." The jetway behind them was emptying, passengers streaming past, edging around the small obstruction of 3 men standing at the terminal entrance, a river parting around a rock with the mild inconvenience of people who have connecting flights to catch. "They showed you the affidavit?" Raphael said. "Yes." "And it named the account structure?" "Yes, from a photograph. From your home office. From a document that was on your desk." Cole's voice didn't change. "She photographed it 3 years ago. They've been sitting on it until the pattern of evidence was complete enough for emergency jurisdiction." He looked directly at Raphael. "It wasn't me. It was always her." Raphael stood in the entrance of the terminal at Charles de Gaulle School Airport at 7 in the morning with his empire frozen in 7 accounts across 2 continents and looked at the man he had been about to drive to a private location to interrogate and tried to restructure what he understood about the last 11 months. "Why are you telling me this?" he said. "Because I have 2 options. I can let you take me somewhere and do what you're thinking about doing, which doesn't help either of us. Or I can tell you what I actually know." Cole glanced at Dmitri, then back. "The investigators are going to be at the primary exit. They coordinated with French authorities for arrival. They're planning to approach you at passport control." He said it with the particular delivery of someone who has decided that information is the only currency left. "I don't know what deal you can make at this point, but I know you have about 8 minutes before you walk into the main terminal, and there is no deal left to make." Raphael looked at him for a long time. "You're very calm," Raphael said. "I've had 3 weeks to get calm." "You stayed on the plane, stayed in position, knowing this was waiting." "Yes." "Why?" Cole looked at him with something that was Absurdly, almost straightforward. Because I've worked for you for 11 months and I've watched how you operate, and I didn't want to be the person who left you walking into something blind. A pause. Whatever you think about that. Raphael breathed in through his nose. The airport air smelled like jet fuel and floor cleaner and the accumulated transit of 10,000 people moving in 10,000 directions. He looked down the terminal corridor at the signs pointing toward passport control, at the ordinary morning business of an international airport operating at full capacity with no knowledge of and no interest in the specific situation of one man standing at the junction of everything he'd built and everything he was about to lose. He looked back at Cole. "Walk with me," he said. He did not go toward passport control. He went left, toward the transit lounges, into the part of the terminal that was neither arrival nor departure, but the in-between, the zone of delayed connections and changed plans, uncomfortable chairs and charging stations, and coffee kiosks doing steady business with people who had nowhere specific to be for the next 2 hours. He found a corner, sat. Dmitri positioned himself 6 feet away with his back to the wall. Cole sat across from him. "Tell me what you know," Raphael said. "All of it. Now." Cole talked for 9 minutes. He had been approached by 2 federal investigators in New York 6 weeks ago. They had shown him the affidavit, the account documentation, a timeline of Serena's cooperation that stretched back 14 months. She had begun 2 months before Vivian, 2 months before the restructure, well before any of the recent escalation. She had been methodical. She had started with what she already had, documents she had photographed over 3 years of marriage, account numbers she had memorized, organizational terminology she had absorbed through proximity without Raphael ever realizing she was absorbing it. She had then, over the following year, used contacts she had built through the civil case to cross-reference what she had against information coming out of 2 other federal investigations running in parallel. Investigations Raphael hadn't known were connected. She had acted as a de facto analyst. She had taken fragmented evidence from 3 separate cases and provided the contextual framework that allowed investigators to understand what they were looking at. She had not turned informant in the simple sense. She had done something more sophisticated. She had taught investigators how to read the organization. Raphael sat with this. "The emergency jurisdiction," he said. "It triggered because of the filing she made in the civil case." Yes, the divorce filing and the federal case are technically separate, but the documentation she submitted to family court, the financial disclosure, included materials that were flagged by the court clerk because they matched patterns in active federal investigation files. It wasn't coordinated, it was coincidental. Cole paused. "Which is worse, actually." "Why?" "Because it means she wasn't trying to trigger the federal case. She was trying to protect the girls, and the federal case got triggered anyway because of how thoroughly she documented everything." He looked at Raphael. "She didn't build a weapon. She built a record. The weapon is just what it turned into when the systems connected." Raphael looked at his hands. The thing he had told Vivian earlier, "She's not doing this to destroy me," sat in him now with a different weight. He had said it and believed it in the abstract. Hearing the specific architecture of it, the 14 months, the 3 parallel investigations, the family court documentation that had collaterally collapsed his financial structures, made believing it more difficult. Not because it changed the conclusion, because it made the conclusion feel enormous. "The investigators at passport control," he said. "What are they expecting?" "A voluntary approach. They've already made contact with your legal team in New York. That call went through about an hour ago." Marcus Fell is aware. That explained Marcus's messages. The careful urgency. Before customs. He had been warned and had been trying to communicate the warning without triggering a panic. "They want cooperation," Cole said. "That's the word they used. They're not here to arrest you at the gate. They want a conversation, voluntary. And if I don't have it," Cole looked at him, "then it becomes involuntary. But they'd prefer voluntary because a voluntary cooperation negotiation gives them more to work with than an adversarial arrest that your legal team spends 6 months contesting." Raphael looked at the ceiling. It was the same ceiling as every international terminal, high, institutional, designed to accommodate volume without offering comfort. Somewhere in the building, in one of the transit corridors or the main arrivals hall, Serena was walking with Mara and Lena through the ordinary mechanics of international arrival. Passport check, baggage claim, the exit into the city. She had done exactly what she came to do and was now moving forward into whatever came next. He thought about Lena drawing the small circle in the fogged window glass. He thought about Mara saying, "I can see lights," with the authority of a person delivering important news. He thought about Vivian's empty seat. He pulled out his phone and called Marcus. "I'm in the transit lounge," he said before Marcus could speak. "Tell me exactly what they're offering." Marcus spoke for 4 minutes. Raphael listened without interrupting. The offer was structured. Cooperation with the ongoing investigation in exchange for a negotiated disposition that preserved certain personal assets and eliminated the criminal exposure of specific individuals Raphael could designate. It was not immunity. It was a ceiling on consequences, which was a different and less comfortable thing. It required him to provide information about organizational structures, financial flows, and individuals above and below him in a network that he had spent 20 years pretending he was the top of. He was not the top of. That was the piece he had never told anyone, including Marcus. The piece that Serena's documentation had apparently gotten close enough to that the investigators were now willing to offer a ceiling on consequences in exchange for confirmation. The Voss organization had backers, older money, older structures, operating above the level that Raphael had always publicly occupied. He was the visible face of something that had a less visible architecture behind it: investors, strategists, individuals whose names appeared in none of his files and whom he had been careful never to document precisely because he understood from the beginning that the day the documentation of those names became someone else's leverage was the day he stopped being useful and started being a liability. The investigators wanted those names. He sat in the transit lounge and understood that what was being offered was not a deal. It was a choice between two versions of what happened next. Both of them ended the world he had built. One of them ended it faster and with more immediate personal cost. The other ended it more slowly and with him intact enough to exist in whatever came after. He thought about Serena. Not strategically. He thought about her face in row 24, in the 45 minutes before the camera clicked and the plane descended and all of it became irreversible. The way she had said, "I'm not a villain in this story." The way she had said it without needing him to agree. He thought about 20 years of rooms he had walked into and owned. He thought about the middle seat in economy class. "Marcus," he said, "tell them I'll come in." His voice was even. "Not passport control. Neutral location, our choice, 2 hours. You'll receive a name and address." He paused. "And tell them I want it understood before we sit down that what I'm about to give them is not available from any other source. What I know is structural. It goes up, not sideways. If they want names that actually matter, they'll accommodate those terms." A silence on Marcus's end that lasted long enough to mean something. "Raphael," Marcus said, "what you're describing, I know what I'm describing. The people above you. I know who they are, Marcus." Another silence. Longer. "If you give those names," Marcus said carefully, "there is no version of this where you walk away clean. The organization will understand what happened. The people at that level do not—" "I know," Raphael said. "Get me the meeting." He ended the call. Dmitri was watching him from 6 feet away. He had heard enough. Not the words, but the tone, the particular quality of a decision that has been made and cannot be walked back. Dmitri had been with Raphael for 12 years. He had the face of a man who understood right now that the 12 years were ending and who was deciding in real time what that meant for him. "You don't have to stay for this part," Raphael said. Dmitri looked at him. "I mean it. What's coming? You being here doesn't benefit you. It exposes you." Raphael held his gaze. "I'm not ordering you anywhere, but if you walk out of this terminal right now and I never see you again, I won't consider it a betrayal." Dmitri was quiet for a long moment. The airport moved around them with its indifferent momentum. Announcements in French and English, luggage wheels on polished floors, the distant percussion of a busy morning in a major hub. "Where do you want the meeting?" Dmitri said finally. Raphael looked at him. "I know a place," Dmitri said. "Quiet. 15 minutes from here." He said it without sentiment, without performance, with the flat practicality of a man who has decided that 12 years means something even when the calculation says it shouldn't. "I'll drive." Raphael nodded once. He stood, picked up his jacket, put it on slowly, smoothing the lapels, the ingrained habit of a man who had always used his appearance as a form of armor. The jacket still held the envelope against his chest. He reached in, removed it, looked at it once. The manila envelope, the papers inside it, Serena's careful handwriting on the outside where she had written his name, and set it on the seat beside him. He didn't need it anymore. Everything in it he now knew by heart. Cole was watching him. "What do you want me to do?" Raphael looked at him. The man who had not flipped, who had spent 3 weeks getting calm, who had walked off a transatlantic flight and told him the truth when the easier and safer option had been to say nothing and let him walk into the main terminal and find out the hard way. "Go home," Raphael said. "Whatever home is for you. Don't contact anyone in the organization. Don't answer calls from numbers you don't recognize." He paused. "And Cole, whatever you told those investigators 3 weeks ago when you said no, that answer is going to matter more in the next few months than you realize. Keep it." Cole looked at him for a moment. Then he stood, picked up his bag, and walked into the terminal without looking back. Raphael watched him go. Then he turned to Dmitri. 15 minutes, he said. They walked toward the exit, not the main arrivals hall, not passport control, but a side corridor that Dmitri knew and Raphael did not. A service-adjacent passage that moved them through the building's interior without the exposure of the public channels. The fluorescent light above them hummed in a frequency just below conscious hearing. Their footsteps on the polished floor were the only sound. Raphael walked and did not think about what was behind him. He thought, for reasons he could not have explained to anyone, about Mara's voice on the plane. "I can see lights." The simple declarative certainty of it. The way a child can look at a city they've never been to and narrate it into existence with complete confidence, as if the act of seeing something is the same as understanding it. He had spent 20 years in rooms he owned. He had spent 7 hours on a plane where he owned nothing. And somewhere in the distance between those two facts was something that felt, moving through the service corridor of an international airport toward the meeting that would dismantle everything, uncomfortably and specifically, like the first honest thing he had felt in a very long time. The exit door opened onto the gray Paris morning, and the cold air hit him like a hand pressed flat against his chest, and Raphael Voss stepped out of the airport and into whatever came next, with no one behind him who was paid to be there, and nothing in front of him that he had built, and the names he was about to give sitting in his chest like stones waiting to be set down. The place Dmitri knew was a hotel bar that wasn't open yet. It was the kind of establishment that existed in the 15th arrondissement of Paris without apologizing for it. A narrow building on a street that the tourist maps didn't bother with. The ground floor occupied by a bar that served decent wine and bad coffee and kept its hours to itself. Dmitri had a contact. Raphael did not ask what kind. The door opened when they arrived, and a man in his 50s with the specific face of someone who rented silence by the hour looked at Dmitri and then at Raphael and stood aside without a word. They sat at a table near the back wall. Stone floor, low ceiling, light coming through windows fronted with frosted glass that turned the early morning Paris gray into something even more compressed and institutional. The kind of room, Raphael thought, that had heard many conversations it would not remember. He called Marcus from the table. 40 minutes, Marcus said. They agreed to neutral location. They're bringing 2, lead investigator and a deputy AG who flew in from Brussels. I'll be there. Who's the lead? Woman named Harlan, Claire Harlan. She's been running the financial crimes division for 3 years. She knows your file better than you do. Raphael considered this. What's her read? She wants the names above you. That's the only thing she's wanted from the beginning. She told me that directly when I spoke to her 20 minutes ago. The asset freeze, the civil filings, the 14 months of documentation from your wife, all of it was infrastructure. It was built to get you to a table where you'd give her what she actually needs. Marcus paused. She said, and I'm quoting, that you're not the target. You're the door. He absorbed this. She's right, he said. A silence from Marcus's end that felt like a man recalibrating something he had believed for a long time. How far up does it go? Far enough that she's going to need more than 40 minutes. Raphael, Marcus's voice was very even. What you're talking about, giving those names, this is not a conversation we can walk back from. The people you'd be identifying, I know who they are. Then you know what they do to people who identify them? Yes. He looked at the frosted window. Outside, the street was beginning to move. Footsteps on stone, the distant compression of a city starting its morning. Marcus, set the meeting. He ended the call. Dmitri had ordered coffee from somewhere. 2 cups, black, no ceremony. He set one in front of Raphael and sat across from him with the other and drank it like a man who has accepted that this is what the morning is. You know what happens, Dmitri said. Not a question. Yes. After you give the names, you know what gets set in motion. Yes. Dmitri looked at his coffee cup. He turned it once in his large hands, the gesture of a man working through something he hasn't fully resolved. I've been with you 12 years. I know. In 12 years, I've done things that... He stopped, started again differently. I'm not a clean man, Raphael. I've never claimed to be. But I've been a loyal one. He looked up. I need to know what loyalty means in the next few hours. What it's worth. What you're asking it to be. Raphael looked at him across the small table in the closed bar in the 15th arrondissement, at the man who had walked out of an airport with him when the calculation said not to, who had known a quiet place 15 minutes away, who had ordered 2 coffees without being asked. It means you drive me to this meeting, Raphael said, and then you go. Wherever you go. You don't stay for what comes after it. And if I want to stay, then you're making a bad decision and I can't stop you. He picked up the coffee. It was too hot, but he drank it anyway, felt it burn down into his chest, something immediate and physical that cut through the cotton numbness that had been settling over him since the plane landed. 12 years, Dmitri. Whatever comes out of this meeting, whatever gets set in motion, none of it touches that. You understand? Dmitri looked at him for a long time. Then he nodded, once, the minimal confirmation of a man who doesn't spend words on things that have been decided. They drank their coffee in silence. 41 minutes later, the door opened. Claire Harlan was 53 and looked like someone who had spent 20 years in rooms where people lied to her and had developed, as a consequence, a face that gave nothing. She was medium height, close-cropped silver hair, a dark blazer over a gray shirt, no jewelry except a watch that was practical rather than decorative. She moved through the bar with the efficient economy of a person who has assessed every room she's ever walked into and stopped being impressed by most of them. Behind her came a younger man, the deputy AG from Brussels, 30s, the clean, careful face of someone who had gone through the right schools and believed in the weight of institutional authority. He carried a slim leather portfolio and looked at the room and at Raphael with the expression of a man who was here to observe rather than lead. Marcus arrived 30 seconds after them, slightly breathless, the particular breathlessness of a man who has been moving faster than his age prefers. He set his briefcase on the table and nodded at Raphael with the compressed expression of an attorney who has done everything he can to prepare for a situation that is, by definition, unprepared for. Harlan sat across from Raphael. She did not extend her hand. She did not perform any of the social mechanics that usually preceded these kinds of conversations. She put her forearms on the table and looked at him. You asked for this meeting, she said. Her voice was mid-range, flat Midwestern American, the accent of someone from a place where directness was just efficiency. So talk. Raphael looked at her. Not until we have terms. I gave your attorney terms. You gave him a ceiling. I want specifics below the ceiling. He held her gaze. The asset freeze? 7 accounts and 3 structures. I want the personal accounts separated from the organizational. Specifically, 2 accounts in Luxembourg that were established before the organization, before any of this, that represent money that has no connection to any operational activity. He paused. Those come off the freeze. Harlan's expression did not change. I'll need documentation of the separation. Marcus has it. She looked at Marcus. He opened his briefcase and slid a folder across the table. She did not open it. She put her hand on it and continued looking at Raphael. What else? She said. My daughters. Whatever proceeds from this, whatever cases get built, whatever prosecutions happen, whatever the organizational response is, my daughter's location stays out of any public filing. Their names, their school, Their residence. Sealed. He kept his voice steady. I don't care what it takes. That's not negotiable. Something moved in Harlan's face. Something very brief that was not quite surprise but was adjacent to it. The micro-expression of a person recalibrating what kind of conversation this is. The children are already protected under standard protocols, the deputy AG began. Standard protocols are not enough. Raphael looked at him directly. The people I'm going to give you are not people who are deterred by standard protocols. I want specific, documented, enforceable protection on their location and identity. Not a procedural courtesy, a guarantee. The deputy AG looked at Harlan. She was still looking at Raphael. Agreed, she said. What else? Nothing else. Those are the terms. He looked at her. In exchange, I'll give you a complete organizational chart from the operational level to the financial architecture above it. Names, account structures, communication channels, and 3 specific individuals who represent the ownership layer of the organization. The people who have never appeared in any filing, any investigation, or any law enforcement database because they have spent 40 years ensuring they don't. He held her gaze. These are not mid-level figures. These are the people who built the structure I was hired to manage. Hired. He had not used that word before, in any conversation, to describe his relationship to the organization. He watched Harlan absorb it. You're saying you were an employee, she said. I'm saying I was the public face of something that had a private ownership. Yes. Harlan sat with this for a moment. The deputy AG was writing. Marcus had gone very still in the way of a man hearing information for the first time that reframes the previous decade of his professional life. If what you're describing is accurate, Harlan said carefully, the 3 individuals at the ownership level, are they currently active? Yes. Are they in the U.S.? 1 is. 2 are European. One of the European ones has dual nationality and travels on 2 passports, one of which has never been flagged. He paused. I have documentation. Not here. It's stored. I can get you access within 24 hours. He looked at her. But I need the terms in writing before I give you the location. Harlan turned to the deputy AG. A silent exchange. The compressed communication of people who work together closely enough to have built a shorthand. He gave the smallest nod. She turned back. We'll have a written agreement within 2 hours. Documentation exchange within 24. She put both hands flat on the table. I need to ask you something directly. Go ahead. Why now? You've known these names for 20 years. You've had this information in your possession, presumably, for the entirety of your time with the organization. You've survived 2 previous federal investigations without giving anything material. She looked at him steadily. What changed? He looked at her. He thought about row 24. He thought about Lena drawing a circle in the fog on the airplane window. He thought about Serena's voice saying, I'm not a villain in this story, Raphael. He thought about standing in the economy aisle of a transatlantic flight at the exact moment when everything he had built stopped being a structure and became a weight. He could give her the operational answer. He could tell her about the asset freeze, the coordinated filings, the exposure, the rational sequence of pressures that had produced a rational decision. It would be accurate. It would be incomplete. My daughters, he said. Someone photographed them outside their school 6 months ago. Someone in the organization, or adjacent to it, ran surveillance on 2 6-year-old children to have something to use against me. He held Harlan's gaze. I don't know who gave the order, but I know the order came from above my level because nothing at my level moves without my authorization, and I did not authorize it. He paused. That's what changed. Harlan was quiet for a moment. All right, she said. She stood, extended her hand finally, and he shook it. 2 hours for the written agreement. We'll need you to stay in Paris until the documentation exchange is complete. We'll arrange accommodation. I have accommodation. Secure accommodation, she said, with the flat emphasis of someone who has already been thinking about what comes next in ways he hasn't fully caught up to. Mr. Voss, the moment word of this meeting leaves this room, and it will, because these things always do, you are no longer safe in a private rental in the 7th arrondissement. She looked at him with the direct, uncomputational gaze of someone who has done this before. The people you're describing are going to know what happened, not immediately. But within 24 to 48 hours, someone in their network will register the freeze, the meeting, the gap in communication from your end, and they will draw the correct conclusion. She paused. We've done this before. Let us manage the next 72 hours. Raphael looked at her. Fine, he said. She left. The deputy AG followed. Marcus sat for a moment, alone with Raphael in the bar that had heard and would not remember, and looked at his client across the small table with the expression of a man who has just watched something irreversible happen and is deciding how to feel about having been present for it. You never told me, Marcus said. No. About the ownership level, the 3 individuals. In 20 years it wasn't necessary for you to know. Raphael looked at his hands, and it wasn't safe for you to know. He looked up. It still isn't, Marcus. When this breaks, and it will break, your position needs to be that you were legal counsel and nothing more. You did not know the organizational structure above my level. That is true. He held his attorney's gaze. Stay behind that truth. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood, straightened his jacket with the deliberate dignity of a man restoring his composure by restoring his appearance. He picked up his briefcase. I'll have the written terms reviewed within the hour, he said. Then he walked out. Raphael sat alone. Dmitri appeared from the corner where he had been standing during the entire meeting, quiet as furniture, as he always was. He sat down across from Raphael without being asked. 72 hours, Raphael said. Roughly. How fast do you think they move? Dmitri considered this with the specific expression of a man evaluating a practical problem. The ownership level. If they're as senior as what you're describing, they'll want confirmation before they act. They'll need to verify through 2 or 3 channels that what they're hearing is accurate. He paused. So maybe not 72, maybe 48. Raphael nodded. There's something else, Dmitri said. Raphael looked at him. The photographer on the plane, the man in row 16. Dmitri's jaw tightened fractionally. He filed before we landed. The photo is already out. 3 outlets picked it up in the first hour. You, in economy, with the woman and the children. He paused. They identified Serena. They're running the story as mafia kingpin confronted by estranged wife on transatlantic flight. He met Raphael's eyes. It's not the federal case, but it's out there. Raphael thought about Serena walking through arrivals with Mara and Lena, about whether she had seen it yet, about whether she had a plan for it. Knowing her, she had 3. Is she still at the airport? She was, as of 40 minutes ago. She was approached by a reporter in the arrivals hall. She didn't comment. Her attorney issued a brief statement. I had Cole monitor it before he left. Dmitri paused. The statement confirmed the divorce filing and said her priority was the safety and privacy of her daughters. Nothing else. Exactly right, Raphael thought. Exactly what he would have advised if she had ever needed his advice, which she clearly had not. Is she safe right now? He said. I don't know. Dmitri said it plainly, without apology for not knowing. She's not mine to watch. She never was. Raphael sat with that. Then he did something he had not planned to do. He pulled out his phone and found the number that his attorney had sent him 3 weeks ago. The number for Serena's legal counsel, included in the divorce documentation as a contact for correspondence. He looked at it. Then he called it. It rang twice. A woman's voice. Professional, wary. This is Helen Marsh? Miss Marsh, my name is Raphael Voss. I'm calling about my wife. He heard the attorney's sharp intake of breath. Recognition, alarm, the compressed reaction of a lawyer who did not expect this call. He kept his voice level. I need you to hear something, and I need you to pass it along to Serena immediately, not through official channels, directly. Mr. Voss, any communication between you and my client should go through. In approximately 48 hours, he said, the organizational response to what I've done this morning is going to involve attempts to identify pressure points. Her location, the girls' school, any traceable routine in their daily life, these will be assessed as leverage. He paused. I've arranged federal protection through Harlan's office, but Harlan's office moves at an institutional pace. The The first 24 hours are the gap. He held the phone. Tell her to move. Not far, not permanently, but not to wherever she's planning to go from the airport, not her regular address. Tell her to go somewhere no one who knows her would think of. A pause. And tell her the Luxembourg accounts, the 2 pre-organization accounts. They're coming off the freeze. That money is clean. It's hers as part of the settlement. She won't have to fight for it. A long silence from the attorney. Is that everything? Helen Marsh said, carefully. Tell her. He stopped. What he wanted to say was not available to him in the clean, precise language he used for everything else. It sat in him without a container. Whatever it was he would have said to Serena if he had been a different kind of man at a different kind of table 20 years ago, the sentence that might have made the subsequent 20 years unnecessary. Tell her the girls were the right choice, he said. She'll understand what that means. He ended the call. Dmitri was watching him. Where does Harlan want us? Raphael said. There's a building in the 9th, one of their coordination offices. She texted the address to Marcus. Raphael stood, buttoned his jacket. The morning light through the frosted glass had changed while they sat here, stronger now, more committed. Paris insisting on its morning with the particular certainty of a city that has been doing this for a very long time and is not impressed by the dramas conducted within it. He looked at the table. 2 empty coffee cups. The folder Marcus had left behind. The cold, flat stone floor. He walked toward the door. Outside, the street was fully alive. People moving to work, a bakery 3 doors down exhaling warm bread smell into the cold air, pigeons conducting their own indifferent business on the cobblestones. A city operating at full amplitude, completely unaware and completely unconcerned with the fact that one of its morning visitors was about to detonate the organizational structure he had managed for 2 decades and spend the next 48 hours in a coordination office waiting to find out if the people above him moved faster than he had. Dimitri's car was parked at the end of the block. They had taken 3 steps toward it when Raphael's phone vibrated in his pocket. He pulled it out. Unknown number. European prefix. He looked at it for 2 full seconds, the phone vibrating against his palm with the patient insistence of something that had been looking for him for a while and had finally found the right moment. He knew, with the cellular animal certainty of a man who has spent 20 years reading signals, exactly who it was. Not the investigators, not Marcus, not anyone connected to anything he had set in motion this morning. The phone continued to vibrate. Dmitri had stopped beside him. He looked at the phone in Raphael's hand and his face went very still in the specific way it went still when he was assessing a threat that he could not physically place himself between Raphael and... Don't answer it, Dmitri said. Raphael looked at the screen. They already know, he said. Raphael, they knew before I made the call. They knew in the airport. He turned the phone over in his hand. 48 hours was optimistic. He looked at Dmitri. Get the car. He answered the phone. Mr. Voss. The voice was male, older, accented with the specific geographic blurring of a person who has lived in too many countries to carry any single one cleanly. It was a voice he had heard exactly 6 times in 20 years, always at significant junctures, always with the particular quality of someone who is not accustomed to having to make calls like this and considers having to do so a data point about your reliability. I think we need to discuss this morning. Raphael kept walking toward the car. Yes, he said. We do. You've made some decisions that concern us. I imagine so. We'd like to give you the opportunity to reconsider. The voice was absolutely even, absolutely without the performance of threat, which was, Raphael knew, how you recognized the most serious kind. There's still a window, a narrow one, but it exists. Dmitri had the car open. Raphael got in the passenger seat. Dmitri walked around to the driver's side, deliberate and unhurried, his eyes moving over the street with the professional sweep of a man doing the job he was trained to do, even when the geometry of it had completely changed. I appreciate the call, Raphael said, into the phone as Dmitri started the engine. But the window closed about 2 hours ago. A pause. Mr. Voss? The voice for the first time carried something underneath the evenness. Not anger, something older and more considered than anger. You understand what this means for you. Yes. Then you understand there's nothing personal in what comes next. I know. Raphael looked out the window as Dmitri pulled into the street. The bakery was still there. The pigeons were still there. Paris continuing its morning in its complete indifference. I'd ask you the same courtesy. Nothing personal in what comes next from my end. The voice was quiet for a moment. That's not how this works, it said. No, Raphael agreed. It never was. He ended the call. Dmitri drove, neither of them spoke. The streets of the 15th moved past the windows, becoming the streets of the 14th, becoming the broader arteries heading north toward the 9th. The coordination office, Harlan, the written agreement, the beginning of what came next. Around them, the city pushed forward with all its irreversible momentum, and Raphael Voss sat in the passenger seat of a car driven by the last person still choosing to be there, and felt, in the specific and unfamiliar way of a man who has just made the only remaining decision that was not a performance, that whatever fear was moving through him right now was the cleanest thing he had felt. Not courage. He was not calling it that. Just the particular clarity of a man who has stopped calculating the exit and started moving through the door. His phone vibrated again. Different number. He looked at it. Marcus, calling with the written terms, the meeting logistics, the institutional machinery beginning to move. He answered it and listened, and gave the required responses, and watched Paris through the window as the car moved north, and thought, for reasons he didn't try to explain to himself, about Mara pointing at the lights from the airplane window. I can see lights. As if the act of seeing them was the same as arriving. He was still working out whether that was true when Dmitri said, very quietly, "We're being followed." Raphael turned. 3 cars back. Gray sedan, following at exactly the right distance. Not close enough to be obvious, not far enough to lose them in the morning traffic. Keeping pace with this kind of steady professional patience that you only learn in a specific kind of work. How long, Raphael said, since we turned onto the boulevard? 2 minutes. Yes. Raphael looked at the gray sedan in the mirror, looked at Dmitri's hands on the wheel. Completely steady. The hands of a man who has done this before and knows that steady hands are what the next few minutes require. Harlan's office, Raphael said. How far? 7 minutes. Maybe 6 if I push it. Push it, Raphael said. Dmitri pushed it. The gray sedan accelerated to match. Dmitri drove the way he did everything, without wasted movement. He did not accelerate dramatically. He did not run lights or cut across lanes with the theatrical urgency of a chase sequence. He simply drove with the precise, unhurried efficiency of a man who understood that the goal was arrival, not spectacle, and that the fastest route between 2 points in a city like Paris at this hour was not the route that announced itself. He took a right on the Rue de Vaugirard, then an immediate left into a narrow one-way street that the gray sedan would have to commit to or abandon. In the mirror, Raphael watched it hesitate at the turn. 1 second, 2, then it took the turn. Still there, Raphael said. I see it. Options. 1. Dmitri's voice was flat. There's a covered market on the Rue Brancion. Delivery access in the back. I can go through. It's tight, but the sedan won't try it if they're being careful. Comes out on the other side 2 blocks from the 14th arrondissement boundary. He glanced in the mirror. From there, it's 4 minutes to Harlan's building. Do it. Dmitri did it. The covered market was exactly as tight as he had described. A service alley barely wider than the car, the smell of vegetables and wet concrete, and the specific darkness of a space that the morning hadn't reached yet. The car moved through it at walking speed, mirrors folded, Dmitri's hands on the wheel with the concentrated precision of a surgeon. Behind them, Raphael watched the entrance to the alley in the side mirror. The gray sedan appeared at the mouth of it, stopped, sat for 2 seconds, and did not enter. They came out the other side into thin morning light and a quiet street of shuttered shops, and one very old man walking a very old dog, both of them moving with the resigned pace of creatures who have been doing this long enough to find it unremarkable. Clear, Dmitri said. Raphael exhaled through his nose. He had not realized he had been holding something until he let it go. Not breath exactly. Some tension in the chest, some bracing that had been running since the phone rang with the old accented voice that had called him 6 times in 20 years. Nothing personal in what comes next. He had heard those words from enough people in enough situations to know what they meant. They meant the decision had already been made before the call. The call was courtesy. Or confirmation. The distinction between those two things would matter in the next 48 hours and would not matter at all after that. His phone vibrated. Marcus. He answered. "The written terms are ready," Marcus said without preamble. "Harlan's office messaged 10 minutes ago. They want you there in the next 30 minutes. They're moving faster than the 2-hour estimate." Something changed. Yes, I don't know what. They just said the timeline has accelerated and they want the documentation exchange to begin today, not tomorrow. A pause. "Raphael, are you safe right now?" He looked at the street they were on. Empty, quiet, Paris doing its unremarkable morning thing. For the moment. Get to Harlan's building. Whatever is moving on their end, being inside that building is better than not being inside it. He ended the call. Looked at Dmitri. "You heard." "Yes." "When we get there," Raphael said, "you go." Dmitri's jaw moved. "Dmitri," he kept his voice even. "This building is a federal coordination office. The moment we walk in, everything that happens inside it is documented. Your being there puts you in a record." He looked at him. "I don't want your name in a record. It's already in records. Not this one. Not at this level." He held Dmitri's gaze across the console. 12 years. You've done enough. You've done more than enough." He paused. "Go somewhere quiet. Don't use your regular phone. I'll have Marcus make sure—" "I don't need Marcus to make sure anything." Dmitri said it without heat. He drove for another block in silence. Then, "Is there anything you need me to do before I go?" Raphael thought about it. "There's a woman," he said. "Serena Vale. She's in Paris. She came in on the same flight. She'll have a hotel somewhere. Her attorney is Helen Marsh. The contact is in my phone." He looked at his hands. "I called Marsh this morning and told her to move Serena and the girls. I don't know if she did. I don't know if Serena listened." He paused. "I need someone to check." Dmitri said nothing for a moment. "Check how?" "Just confirm they're not at a regular hotel, that they moved somewhere off pattern." He paused. "Don't approach them. Don't make contact, just confirm." "And if they didn't move?" Raphael breathed out slowly. "Then tell me." Dmitri nodded once. The building Harlan was using appeared ahead of them, a limestone facade on a quiet street in the 9th, indistinguishable from the residential buildings on either side of it, except for the slight over-engineering of the entrance and the particular blankness of its windows, which were the kind that didn't let you see in. Raphael had been in buildings like this before, on various sides of the table. They smelled the same inside regardless of which country you were in. A specific combination of industrial carpet and recirculated air and the accumulated pressure of decisions that had been made in them. Dmitri pulled to the curb. They sat for a moment. "Thank you," Raphael said. Dmitri looked at him. He did not say "you're welcome" because Dmitri was not a man who said that, and the situation was not one that accommodated the standard shapes of gratitude. He nodded once, the same minimal confirmation he had given before, the language of a man who communicates in compressions. Raphael got out. He did not look back at the car. He walked to the door and it opened before he reached it, and he went inside. The meeting lasted 4 hours and 19 minutes. He had expected the written terms first. Instead, Harlan sat him at a table in a room with no windows and put a single document in front of him and told him to read it before they discussed anything else. It was a surveillance log, dated 11 months ago through 3 days prior. A record of movements, communications, and activities belonging to a man named Werner Haas, the eldest of the 3 ownership-level individuals whose names Raphael had come to Paris to give. It was organized, thorough, and ran to 43 pages. He read it. He read it with the particular slowness of someone processing the specific dislocation of seeing their own life described from the outside, references to meetings he had attended, decisions he had been part of, junctures in the organizational history of the past 11 months that he had believed existed only in the sealed compartments of his own operational knowledge. He looked up from the document. You already had him, he said. Harlan was sitting across the table with a coffee cup she hadn't touched. We've had a partial picture for 16 months. What we didn't have was the connective tissue between Haas and the U.S. operational structure, the financial channels, the account architecture that puts his money in the same flow as yours. She looked at him. Your wife gave us the architecture. You're going to give us the connections. He sat with this. You built the civil case, he said, and the federal case, to build the European case. Yes. You were never primarily interested in the Voss organization. We were interested in everything the Voss organization was connected to, Harlan said. You specifically, your individual exposure, was always secondary. He thought about something Marcus had said. She said, you're not the target, you're the door. He thought about Serena 14 months ago, beginning to cooperate with investigators who were building something larger than a divorce filing, larger than a federal financial case, larger than anything he had understood himself to be part of. He thought about the fact that Serena had understood this, and he had not. He looked at Harlan. What did she know? About Haas? About the ownership level? She knew there was a level above yours. She didn't have names. She had account structures and communication patterns that were consistent with a hierarchy that extended past you. Harlan's expression was measured. She was the one who suggested looking at the Luxembourg connections. She said, and I'm quoting from her first interview with us, that her husband always seemed to be reporting to someone but had never told her who. He breathed out very slowly through his nose. She had been right, in the way she was right about everything, not through access to information he didn't have, but through paying attention to the things he had given her while assuming she wasn't paying attention. 14 months of cooperation built on 3 years of marriage and 6 years of watching from the outside. And she had given investigators a thread that had led, through 14 months of careful pulling, all the way to Werner Haas. Give me a pen, he said. Harlan pushed one across the table. He spent the next 4 hours and 17 minutes talking. Oh. The light in the room never changed because there were no windows. He tracked time by the coffee that arrived and was replaced and arrived again, by the rotation of people in and out, Harlan staying constant, the deputy AG coming and going, a financial analyst joining for the account structures portion, a man who never introduced himself sitting in the corner taking notes by hand. He gave them Werner Haas. He gave them the second name, a Belgian shipping magnate named Koers, whose legitimate business had been a laundering architecture for 30 years. He gave them the third name more carefully, because the third was the most dangerous, and the documentation was not in his possession, but in a storage facility in Geneva that required specific coordination to access. He gave them the account channels, the communication architecture, the specific terminology that appeared in coded correspondence and would appear again in the materials from Geneva. He gave them 11 months of meeting logs that he had kept in the same old-fashioned discipline that had kept him alive, written by hand, stored physically, never digitized, because the thing about organizations built on paranoia is that the people inside them become paranoid by proximity. He gave it methodically, without drama, without the performance of cooperation that people sometimes deployed when they were trying to get credit for something that cost them nothing. It cost him. He was aware of that with every name he said aloud, every account designation he confirmed, every connection he drew between things that had been designed never to be drawn together. At the end, Harlan sat across from him and looked at him for a long moment without speaking. Is there anything you've left out? She said. He thought about it honestly, not intentionally. Is there anything you think we should know that you haven't been asked about? He thought about Cole, about Dmitri, about the names of people below his level, lieutenants, managers, the operational middle layer of a structure that was now going to be disassembled from the top down. He thought about which of those people had known what they were part of and which had not. The people below my level, he said. Most of them didn't know the ownership structure. They knew me. They knew the organization as I presented it. He paused. Some of them have families. Some of them got into this the way people get into things. Incrementally, in circumstances that didn't seem like a decision at the time. He held Harlan's gaze. I'm not asking for immunity on their behalf. I'm asking you to remember that the structure I was describing today was designed to make sure the people operating it couldn't see the top of it. He paused. That was Werner Haas's design, not mine. Harlan looked at him. "I'll note it," she said. It wasn't a promise. It was the most he was going to get. "The protection for my daughters," he said. "The sealed location. It's already filed. Before this meeting started." She said it without making him feel relieved, which he respected. "Whatever happens in the next 48 hours, the organizational response, the press, their location is sealed. Their names in the civil filing are redacted in every public-facing document." She paused. "Your wife's attorney was very thorough on this point. She had it in her conditions before our first meeting with her." He looked at the table. Helen Marsh, who had built the conditions before the first meeting 14 months ago. Serena, who had built the conditions before she ever sat down with anyone. Because building the conditions first was what you did when you had learned that the people across the table from you were not by nature inclined to give you what you needed unless you had already established that you were going to need it. "There's one more thing," Harlan said. She reached into the folder in front of her and pulled out a single sheet of paper and pushed it across the table. "This came to our Paris office this morning. It's a statement from your wife's attorney, supplementary to the civil filing. She asked us to make sure you saw it." He looked at the paper. It was brief. A formal legal notification that the civil divorce proceedings were proceeding on an uncontested basis, that the custody arrangement had been stipulated as agreed, and that the Luxembourg accounts would be accepted as the primary settlement asset in lieu of any contested claim against the operational accounts. At the bottom, in Helen Marsh's letterhead, was a single handwritten line that was not part of the formal notification. "She said to tell you, the girls know your name now. Mara asked this morning, S." He sat with that for a long time. The man in the corner kept writing. Harlan drank her coffee, finally. The fluorescent light hummed in its constant frequency above them. And outside the windowless room, Paris continued to be Paris. Indifferent, beautiful, older than any of them. He folded the paper and put it in his jacket pocket. "Oh, they put him in a safe apartment in the 10th, 4th floor, 2 bedrooms, clean and impersonal in the way of all temporary accommodations that are meant to be functional rather than comfortable. A federal protection officer, a woman in her 30s named Sylvie, who introduced herself once and then stopped introducing herself, was positioned outside the door. Harlan told him the arrangement would last a minimum of 72 hours and potentially longer depending on how the organizational response developed. He stood at the window of the main room and looked at the street below. Late afternoon, the light going orange and low the way Paris afternoon light does, that specific quality of warm decay, everything softened and edged in gold that was already leaving. People below walking home from work, a woman with 2 shopping bags, a man on a bicycle who ran the light at the corner and didn't look back. He was standing there when his phone rang. Unknown number. European prefix. He answered. "Mr. Voss." A different voice this time, not the old accented one. This one was younger, British, with the careful diction of someone who had been trained to speak in a specific register and had been doing it so long it had become their natural one. "My name is not important. I've been asked to call as a courtesy." "Werner Haas," Raphael said. A pause. "He sends his regards." "I imagine he does." "He also asked me to convey that the matter of the Geneva facility has been rendered moot. The materials you referenced in your meeting this morning are no longer at that location." Raphael went still. Across the room, the protection officer's radio crackled softly through the closed door. Sylvie's muffled response, the ordinary sound of institutional monitoring. "When?" he said. "This afternoon, shortly before your meeting concluded." The voice was patient and without satisfaction. He anticipated the disclosure. He had anticipated it for some time, actually. He said to tell you that he always knew you were the kind of man who would eventually choose the people he loved over the organization. A pause. He said he considered that a character flaw, and also that he found it somewhat admirable. He told me that was important to convey. Raphael breathed in through his nose. The Geneva materials, the handwritten logs, the specific documentation of Haas's communication channels, the physical record that would have been the most direct evidentiary link between the ownership level and the operational structure. Gone. "What does he want?" Raphael said. "He doesn't want anything. This isn't a negotiation. He wanted you to know that the case your cooperation has contributed to is going to be harder to build than the investigators currently believe. The voice remained even, unhurried. Some of what you gave them today is accurate. Some of it is accurate but unprovable without the Geneva materials. Some of it will lead investigators into structures that have already been dissolved. A pause. You gave them what you had. He's had 6 months to prepare for what you had. Raphael turned from the window. Why tell me, he said. Because he respects you, whatever that's worth. Another pause. And because he wants you to understand something clearly. He is not going to come after you. The voice said it with the specific quality of a statement that has been carefully chosen for weight. The daughters especially, he's giving you his word on that. Whatever the case builds into, whatever the next 2 years look like, they are not part of his response. His word, Raphael said. Yes. He thought about Werner Haas. He had met the man 9 times in 20 years. A compact, precise, white-haired Belgian who collected first-edition books and spoke 4 languages with equal fluency and had built an empire across 3 continents with the patient, systematic focus of someone who understood that the most dangerous structures were the ones that looked completely unremarkable from the outside. He was 71 years old and had never been named in a legal document in his life. Tell him I heard him, Raphael said. He'll want to know if you believe him. He thought about it. Genuinely, without the performance of consideration. He thought about what he knew of Haas's operational logic, the efficiency of it, the way it eliminated unnecessary friction. Going after children was friction. It was noise. It attracted exactly the kind of attention that Haas had spent 40 years carefully avoiding. Yes, he said. Tell him I believe him. The line went dead. He stood in the middle of the room with the phone in his hand and the late Paris light coming through the window and the weight of the day settling over him like something physical. He thought about the Geneva materials being removed, about how much of what he'd given Harlan this afternoon would hold without them, about the case that was now going to be harder to build than she believed. He had cooperated completely. He had given everything he had. It was going to matter less than he'd hoped, and more than nothing, which was the category that most things fell into, in his experience. He sat down on the edge of the bed, one of the 2 beds in the safe apartment, covered in the standard-issue neutrality of federal accommodation, and put his face in his hands for a moment, not in despair. In the simple, exhausted privacy of a man who has been performing something since 6 in the morning and needs 30 seconds where no one can see his face. Then he straightened up. He called Marcus. Told him about the Geneva materials, listened to Marcus's silence, which lasted 4 seconds, and communicated significant information. Marcus said he'd contact Harlan. Raphael said yes. They ended the call. He lay back on the bed fully dressed and looked at the ceiling. He thought about Haas's word. He thought about the fact that he was choosing to believe it, and about what it meant that he was choosing to believe it, that he was doing the same calculation Serena had done, the same one she had been doing for 6 years, the one where you look at what's available and decide what you can live with believing. She had believed she could protect the girls without him. She had been right. He thought about what she had done, the specific architecture of it, the patience required to build something that thorough over 14 months while simultaneously raising 2 children alone in the aftermath of everything he had put her through. He thought about the way she had sat in row 24 with her book and waited for him to come to her. He thought about how she had described the man outside the school, the camera, the long lens, the way she had walked toward him and he had left. She had built everything she built because someone had pointed a camera at her daughters, and she had understood that the only way to make them safe was to remove the thing that made them a target. The thing had been him. She had removed him. He lay on the bed in the safe apartment and felt the specific, irreversible quiet of a man who has finally understood something that was always true, and that he had spent 20 years too busy to sit still long enough to hear. 4 days later, Marcus drove him to a location outside Paris that Harlan's office had arranged, a transit point for a relocation protocol that would move him to a new residence under a supervised arrangement while the case developed. He was not under arrest. He was not in custody. He was in the particular status of a man who had made an agreement and was being held loosely to it in the way that agreements of this kind worked, not with locks, but with the understanding that the agreement was the only thing standing between him and a situation that was significantly worse. He had one request. Marcus had arranged it, Harlan had approved it, with conditions, with a protection officer in an unmarked car at the end of the street, and a 45-minute window. The park was in the 7th arrondissement. Small, unremarkable, the kind of green space that exists between bigger things. A few benches, a gravel path, trees that had been there long enough to have achieved the comfortable permanence of things that do not need attention. Serena was already there when he arrived. She was sitting on a bench at the far end of the path in a dark coat with a coffee cup held in both hands. No children. She had not brought the girls, which he had expected and which was correct. He had not asked her to come. She had arranged it through Helen Marsh, apparently, when Marcus had made the request. She had said yes, with conditions, which was the language of a woman who had learned that saying yes without conditions was how you ended up in situations you hadn't planned for. He sat on the other end of the bench. They did not speak for a moment. Above them, the trees were doing what November trees in Paris do, holding on to a few last leaves with the stubborn patience of things that know winter is coming and have decided not to rush it. "You called Helen," Serena said. "Yes. She told me to move. I had already moved." A pause. "I'd been planning to move since before we boarded the plane." "I know." She looked at her coffee cup. "The Luxembourg accounts. Marcus's office contacted Helen yesterday. They're yours. There's no condition on them." She was quiet for a moment. "That's more than the settlement required." "I know." She turned her head and looked at him. It was the same look she had given him in row 24, that steady, absorptive attention that took things in without reflecting them back. She looked at him the way someone looks at a place they used to know, trying to reconcile what they remembered with what they can see. "The girls are safe," she said. It was not a question. "Yes." Harlan's office sealed it before the meeting, and, he paused, decided to say it. "The man above me. He called, through someone. He gave his word they wouldn't be touched." She looked at him. "You believe him?" "I do." "Why?" "Because hurting them gains him nothing and costs him the kind of attention he's spent 40 years avoiding." He looked at his hands. "It's not kindness, it's logic. But in my experience, people are more reliably governed by logic than by kindness." She looked back at her coffee. A pigeon landed on the gravel path in front of them, regarded them both with the profound indifference of a Paris pigeon, and walked on. "Mara asked about you," Serena said. "Helen's note said." "She asked because she saw the photograph. From the plane." A pause. "The one the man took. It ran in 3 outlets. She can't read yet, but she saw the image and asked why Mama was in a picture with a man." He said nothing. "I told her you were someone I knew a long time ago." She turned the coffee cup once in her hands. "She asked if you were nice." A pause. "I told her you were complicated." She thought about that for a while and then said that her teacher is complicated too. He looked at her. There was something in her face, watching the path ahead of them, that was not quite the beginning of a smile, but occupied the same territory. Some involuntary movement at the corner of her mouth that was the trace evidence of a real expression trying to decide whether to exist. "What will you tell her?" he said. "When she's older, the real version." Serena was quiet for a moment. That her father was a man who built something powerful and spent a long time thinking that made him strong. She paused. And that it took him a very long time to understand the difference between powerful and strong. He sat with that. "That's generous," he said. "It's accurate," she said. "I told you I wasn't a villain. I meant it both directions." She looked at him. "I'm not going to tell them a monster story. They deserve to understand what actually happened, the complexity of it, the failure of it. Not a simple version where someone is the hero and someone is the enemy." She paused. "They're going to grow up. They're going to have to navigate a world that's full of people who are both things at once. They should know how to do that." He thought about Lena drawing the circle in the fog, about Mara saying, "I can see lights." "Can I—" He stopped, started again. "I'd like to know them, eventually, when you decide it's appropriate. If you decide it's appropriate." He looked at the path. "I'm not asking for anything specific. I'm not asking you to decide now. I just want you to know that I would like that." She was quiet for a long time. "I know," she said finally. They sat in the November park with the last leaves coming down in the specific Paris way. Slow, almost deliberate, each one making its own unhurried decision about when to let go. And did not speak for a while because the things that remained between them were not the kind that words improved. At some point, Serena's phone lit up on the bench between them. She glanced at it, put it face down. "I have to get back," she said. "I know." She stood, held the coffee cup, looked at him, one more time, with that full absorptive attention, taking what she saw without performing a reaction to it. Whatever she concluded, she kept it. "Take care of yourself, Raphael," she said. It was the most ordinary thing she could have said. It was exactly ordinary enough to land in the specific way that ordinary things land when they are said by people who mean them precisely, without performance, without anything underneath them except the clean and unadorned fact of meaning. He nodded. She walked back down the gravel path. He watched her go until she reached the park entrance and turned out of it and was gone. He sat for another few minutes, alone on the bench, in the empty park, in the city that didn't know or care who he was or what he had been or what the next 2 years were going to look like, as the case built without the Geneva materials, and Werner Haas moved his pieces with the patient, systematic focus of a man who had been doing this for 40 years and had anticipated exactly this moment. He had given everything he had. It was going to be enough for some things and not enough for others, and that was the actual texture of consequence. Not clean, not complete, not the neat resolution of a ledger brought to zero. He had 2 daughters. One of them carried his blood. Both of them had drawn circles in fogged airplane windows and pointed at city lights and asked their mother if the complicated man in the photograph was nice. He had an agreement with investigators that would govern the next 2 years of his life in terms he had not chosen but had accepted. He had a man across the table with 40 years of patience who had removed the most incriminating evidence and given his word, which was worth something and not worth everything, which was what all given words were worth, in the end. He had a bench in a Paris park in November. The protection officer's unmarked car was at the end of the street. The 45-minute window was almost closed. Marcus would be coming. He stood. He straightened his jacket. The same motion, the same ingrained ritual, the armor adjusted. Then he stopped, stood with his hands at his sides and his jacket slightly crooked and the last leaf of the particular tree above him coming down in the slow, considered way of something that has decided it is finally time, and he left it. He walked back down the gravel path. At the park entrance, he stopped and looked back once. At the bench, at the tree, at the empty path with its gravel and its pigeons, and its absolute indifference to what had just been said and decided and set in motion and quietly, irrevocably released within it. Then he turned and walked out into the street, into the ordinary afternoon, into whatever came next. Behind him, the park continued to be a park. The trees continued to let go of what they'd been holding, and somewhere across the city, in a location no public filing would ever name, 2 small girls were doing whatever 6-year-olds do in the late afternoon of a Paris November. Ordinary, unaware, completely and safely and stubbornly alive. That was enough. It was not everything, but it was enough.